another surfside night. I can see the waves, I can see the moon, but mostly I see you. With my eyes I see you standing there without a care. With my heart I see you wanting more of what love has in store. And now I want to stay right here with you. When I see you in a moment, everything around us falls away, and all I see is you. And I feel you right beside me. Everything familiar now feels new whenever I'm with you. This is love. Here we are again. It's like a dream, but this is real to me. It happens every day when I see your face. The world just falls.
Hi everyone, I'm Yolanda Elliott, President of SDA Kinship International. Thanks for joining us on the second weekend of our 42nd camp. Camp meeting is one of the ways that we keep this community connected, no matter where we are located. I also encourage each one to join the Kinship business meeting on Sunday, 12 noon Eastern Time. We will have the election results with no recounts and other fascinating Kinship business. You don't want to miss it. I can't wait to see everyone next year, and with any luck, in person. Until then, always remember, you are loved and affirmed.
Hello everyone, my name is Floyd and I'm SDA Kinship's Vice President. It's my honor to welcome you to Kinship's 42nd Annual Camp Meeting. 2 weeks ago we had the first part, and now we have part two, the conclusion of this year's virtual camp meeting. Unfortunately, we're not in person, but we're looking forward to next year being together in Orlando, Florida for an in-person camp meeting. If this is your first time hearing about Kinship, a little about us. We're the only affirming LGBTQ community within the Adventist Church, and we have members represented in 103 countries around the world. So we're an international organization to provide a safe community for all of our members. The theme of this year's camp meeting is loved and affirmed. And so as you're watching, just remember that you are loved and affirmed just exactly as you are, whether you're LGBTQIA plus, a family member, or an ally. You're all welcome here with SDA Kinship. So hope you enjoy the programming, both Friday night and 2 on Sabbath. And we would encourage you to join us also for the Zoom lunch that's between the two meetings on Sabbath. To register for those meetings, you can go to our website, sdakinship.org/camp meeting, and sign up. We have special breakout rooms for the Kin youth, those who are under 35, Kinship seniors, and as well as our family and friends. So we have lots of programming and lots of great conversation for everyone. So please join us. And also on Sunday, at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, we'll be having a Kinship business meeting where all members are invited and welcome to join, find out a little bit more about what Kinship is doing, the statistics of where our members are located, and just about our programming and what we have plans for coming up in the new year. So we're happy that you're here with us today, and we hope you enjoy the programming. And I'm always Anxious to hear your feedback and any comments you have. You can contact me at info@sdakinship.org, and we'll be happy to respond to you. So thank you very much, and enjoy.
Antes de eu falar, tu cantava sobre mim. Tu tens sido tão, tão bom pra mim. Antes de eu respirar, sopraste tua vida em mim. Tu tens sido tão, tão bom pra mim. Oh, impressionante, infinito, ousado amor de Deus. O que deixa as 99 só pra me encontrar? Não posso comprá-lo, nem merecê-lo. Mesmo assim se entregou. Oh, impressionante, infinito, ousado amor de Deus. Inimigo eu fui, mas teu amor lutou por mim. Tudo tem sido tão, tão bom pra mim. Não tinha valor, mas tudo pagou por mim. Tudo tem sido tão, tão bom pra mim. Oh, impressionante, infinito, ousado amor de Deus. Oh, que deixa as 99 só pra me encontrar. Não posso comprá-lo, nem merecê-lo. Mesmo assim se entregou. Oh, impressionante, infinito, ousado amor de Deus. Traz-nos para as sombras, escala montanhas pra me encontrar. Derruba muralhas, destrói as mentiras pra me encontrar. Traz-nos para as sombras, escala as montanhas pra me encontrar. Derruba muralhas, destrói as mentiras pra me encontrar.
many of you have been to a previous camp meeting know, we always take a moment, usually during the church service, to ask for your financial support during the upcoming year. Nothing that Kinship does or has been able to do in the past would have been possible without the support of its members and allies. We know this has been a very difficult year with the pandemic, but if you are able, please go to Kinship's website at sdakinship.org, find the Donate tab, and either make a one-time contribution or an ongoing monthly pledge. We're very proud of the work that Kinship's been able to do over the last 40 years, but it would not have been possible without your support. Big virtual hugs, and enjoy the rest of the program.
Hi, I'm Kumar Dixit, chaplain at Kinship International. I'm so glad that you can join us this week and next week for a very special Kinship camp meeting. As the chaplain, I want to be able to pray with you, help you grow in your own spiritual life, and help you reach your spiritual goals. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to stay in touch with you. And you can also find more information about me on the website. But for now, as we begin this weekend, let's pray together. Father God, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to learn more about you, to grow in our faith, and to discover how much you love us. And God, may we remember that you've never given up on us and you will never give up on us. And may we grow in our faith in you. We trust in you. Amen. Have a great week. I hope that you grow spiritually. I hope we can stay in touch.
Derruba muralhas, destrói as mentiras pra me encontrar.
Hello and welcome. Good afternoon and happy Sabbath, everyone. I'm glad you can join us as we conclude the second weekend of Kinship's 42nd camp meeting. This afternoon, we have the pleasure of Pastor Alicia Johnston as our keynote speaker. And before I pass the mic over to her, I just wanted to remind everyone of tomorrow's business meeting. It is officially starting at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So then, depending on your time zone, plan accordingly. So Pastor Alicia Johnston, she is a former pastor in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She holds an MDiv from the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary, as well as a Master in Arts in Clinical Psychology. In 2017, she came out as a LGBTQ affirming and as bisexual in a viral video that resulted in her being forced to resign. Her story was featured in several news outlets, such as NBC and Religious News. Her passion is helping Christians see why they can affirm same-sex marriage and support gender transition. She currently lives in Phoenix, Arizona with her wife and her adorable dogs, Prescott and Mingus. She enjoys flirting with her wife, of course, camping, hiking, playing with her niece and nephew. So without further ado, Pastor Alicia Johnston. I think we still have you muted, Pastor Johnston.
There we go. Is that better? I'm going to be sharing my screen in just a minute, just in case you haven't given that over to me yet. So I'm really glad to be able to be with you all, even if it's virtual. Look forward to seeing you in person next year. So I've kind of taken this time since, it's less of a sermon and more of having some extended time to do some theological explanation to talk about some of the things I have shared in my book, which will be going out soon to those of you who supported the Kickstarter and will be available to everyone else soon after that. And we're fully funded and got a little bit more even than that. So I'm really excited about that. So I wanted to share some things. I've done a lot of podcasts and you can look those up, but I was trying to think about what are some things I haven't gone into in as much depth anywhere else. And so I wanted to share some of that today. And I have some slides I want to share and just kind of explain them a bit. And if you have questions, if you're on Zoom, if you could put it in the chat or put it in the YouTube discussion, and Reggie can ask me some of those towards the end if we have time. Yeah, and I don't want to go over time. Reggie, what time is it supposed to be ending? I'm sorry, I should have had that already.
You have a total of an hour.
Okay.
So plan
All right.
accordingly. Okay.
I will do my best. No, I will stay under an hour. All right. So I decided today that I wanted to share a bit of what affirming theology from an Adventist perspective looks like in relation to the creation story in Genesis 1 and 2, and specifically around the subjects of marriage and the Sabbath, which are so important to Adventists. And this is one of the sections in my book that's very unique in that it addresses specifically Adventist concerns that you're not going to find a whole lot in a lot of different books. So I'm going to share my slides with you now. There we go. So hopefully you can see that. Yeah, so creation, marriage, and the Sabbath. And I want to begin with in the way that I do in all my books. I want to begin by talking about what the church is currently teaching. So right now, what the Adventist church is teaching, which I just call the accepted Adventist perspective, is that heterosexual marriage, the whole reason for it, is that it's rooted in the creation accounts from Genesis 1 and 2, that God created marriage from the beginning to be between one man and one woman. You've heard that before. And that God also created gender in creation as binary. He created the male and female. So they might say, they do say, God created gender as a binary. Gender is not binary. You're born either male or female, just like you're created in male or female. And those categories can't be changed. And then they would go on to talk about, this is very Adventist, to talk about how important specifically creation is, because it shows us how things began. It showed us how things were before sin existed. So this is kind of like before everything got messed up, right? So if you want to know what we're supposed to be like as human beings, you go back to Genesis 1 and 2, because that's before everything got messed up. You've probably heard, all of the story of the Bible is just us getting back to Genesis. So things were perfect, things got messed up, and we just need to get back to that. We need to recreate that state in which we existed in Genesis. And then they would also tie that to the last 2 chapters in Revelation, which is a description of the earth made new. And that description carries a lot of the same things that exist in the first 2 chapters of Genesis. So you have the rivers, the tree of life, and all of those things, very, very, very descriptive things that existed in Genesis and then exist also in the earth made new. So, so that's kind of the conclusion. Therefore, we should model our lives today after creation, because that's where we can see what God's will really was. That's where we can see what was really good, is creation. And so then they say, and in creation, of course, the a little bit absurd, maybe overworn phrase, Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. So that's what existed in creation. So that's what we should be modeling ourselves after today. So creation is a model. That's what accepted theology teaches. Creation is a model for our lives today to help us understand what it means to be people who are living in God's will. That's what they believe. So, and then this gets even more Adventist when you start talking about the Sabbath. So the Sabbath and marriage, Ellen White describes them as twin institutions. And so then the conclusion then becomes that same-sex marriage, then you're violating. Of course, Ellen White didn't say that, but this is what people say today, that with same-sex marriage, you're violating the institution of marriage. And so why not also the Sabbath? Like if you're gonna go against creation in one area, why not go against creation in the other area? You're undermining the Sabbath, which, I mean, I think all of us here probably understand how important the Sabbath is to Adventists. identity to Adventist eschatology, our prophetic interpretation of what's going to happen in the future. So, this is kind of the foundation of what it is to be Adventist. So they're saying by implication, then same-sex marriage undermines that for that reason. All right, so that's what they teach. You probably heard those things before. Just wanted to review it. And here is some things, you may have heard some of this before too, but this is an affirming Adventist perspective. This is, how we get someplace different. And, I just like to start with the basics. The word Genesis itself means beginning. And the very first words of the Bible are in the beginning. So I believe that, when we think about creation and what the meaning of creation is, we're talking about how things were in the beginning. So rather than using the understanding of Genesis, that Genesis is a model and the way that things are supposed to be kind of henceforth and forever for all time, Genesis is a beginning, and beginnings are very different than models, as we will see. It's a very different starting place than it is to think of Genesis 1 and 2 as a model. So a model doesn't necessarily represent the full range of possibilities for creation. And let me give you some examples of that. So in Genesis 1, it talks about the things that have been created. So let me just read a little bit about that. Genesis 1:3, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good. He separated the light from the darkness, calling the light day and the darkness night. And there was evening and morning the first day. So you have this kind of contrast between darkness and light that exists in the text. So, kind of these polar opposites. So, does that sound like it's binary? And then it says, God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And so God made the expanse that separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. So again, you have the separation. Basically, we're speaking here of the sky, which it would seem understood to have water in it, making it blue, and the waters below. And so the surface, was all water. So all you have now is an atmosphere with water on two sides, right? And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning, a second day. And then God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered into one place." So the bottom waters, now we're going to separate again. "Let the waters be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." So now we're separating out the water from the dry land. So again, is this binary? And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And then he said, "Let there be sprout vegetations and fruits and plants yielding seeds and fruits according to their seeds." So, then we have plants and vegetables all over the land, evening and morning. And then, and now this one's very important. "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for a sign for the seasons, for days and years. And let them be light the expanse to heaven and give light to the earth." And it was so. So he made two great lights, the sun, the greater, to rule the day, and the lesser, the moon, to rule the night. I'm adding my own words in there a little bit. So now you have the light, which is ruled by the greater light, the sun, and you have the nighttime, which is ruled by the lesser light, the moon. Right. So are we getting binary here? Now there's animals in the water. Let the waters swarm with living creatures. Let the birds above fly in the expanse of the heavens. So God created sea creatures, and then in the water, and then later God creates creatures that live on the land. And so you have kind of all these different categories that God creates. And then along that same theme, we have a very key verse in verse 28 or verse 26. It says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heaven and the livestock and all of the earth. So, verse 27, God created man, or humanity, mankind, if you're looking at the Hebrew word. God created humanity in God's own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And so this is really, a verse that's looked at both to forbid same-sex marriage, because it is interpreted male and female, he created them, as an expression of heterosexual marriage, particularly since it goes on to say, be fruitful and multiply. So God created marriage, but it's also like the verse for forbidding people from gender transition, and that encourages Christians not to support their family members when they transition their gender. So this is really the verse that's used. There's almost nothing else, unless you just say that there's no transgender people in the Bible, unless you make that argument, which is problematic for all kinds of ways. But we'll set that aside. But if you're really looking at a verse to say that people shouldn't be trans, like, this is kind of the only one. There's one in Deuteronomy 22:5 that says that people shouldn't wear the clothes of the other gender. But that's right next to a verse that says you shouldn't mix, different kinds of fabrics in your clothing. And so I think people have gone away from that more as they've understood that it's really applying that verse dogmatically is pretty easy to see that you shouldn't do that when we don't apply another verse dogmatically right next to it with the same basic idea of not mixing. That there could have been some kind of a ceremonial or some other kind of a implication there, but we don't really know, but it's really problematic. So it leaves it resting pretty much on this verse, Genesis 1:27. In order to any other verses I've seen people use are just verses that talk about male and female, just in general about things, about men being men and women being women, but there's no specific, just because you describe men and you describe women doesn't say anything about transgender people or non-binary people or anything like that. So it becomes really difficult. And this verse is really central. And so what they're saying is, look, this is binary. God created them male and female. It's binary. There's not like a switching of genders as they would conceive it. That's the way they think about it, right? I don't think about it that way. I think of it as being quite innate, but that a person couldn't be assigned one gender at birth and then say that they're another gender later. They say you can't do that. Look, God created male and female, and that's supposed to be involved in procreation. So the reason why I read all those other verses before as well is to show that this supposed binary in Genesis 1:27 doesn't show up there for the first time. It's been happening all through Genesis 1. It's a major part of Genesis 1. And you have, the light, the light and the dark, and the waters above and the waters below, and the land and the water. And you have creatures who are in their respective places that God has put them in, the birds of the air, the creatures that swarm in the sea, and the creatures that are on the land. So you have all these categories. So if we are going to say then that Genesis 1:27 is a binary that can't be changed or altered or challenged, then we have to ask ourselves, are we being consistent with the rest of the chapter? And this is probably the biggest phrase, one of the biggest phrases I use in explaining affirming theology or in critiquing the established theology is, are we being consistent? Because again and again, I see applications of verses that are used to exclude transgender people or to exclude LGBTQ people that are not consistent with the way we interpret the rest of Scripture. So are we being consistent with Genesis 1? Okay, so we have the sun that rules by day and the moon that rules by night. Now, when there's a total eclipse of the sun, which happens occasionally, and the moon completely blocks out the sun, and all of a sudden it's very dark during the middle of the day, do we then say this is sin in the world, that it's assaulting the binary that God created at creation, in which the sun is by day or the moon is by night? Of course not. What if the moon doesn't show up at nighttime? Is that a problem? Or what if the moon is just there and the moon and the sun are there together in the sky in the middle of the day? Is that a problem? Like, obviously not. Like, this is almost pedantic, but of course, when we read the sun rules by day and the moon rules by night, of course, we automatically, everybody, whether you're affirming or not affirming or whatever, automatically just assume that this is a general description of kind of the most salient points and not a dogmatic moral judgment. The same thing happens with, it says the birds of the sky. Well, obviously some birds aren't birds of the sky. Penguins spend some of their life swarming in the sea with the sea creatures. Other birds are land birds that can't fly at all, like an ostrich or something like that. I mean, I've just never heard somebody say that Satan invented ostriches and penguins. Frogs spend part of their lives as animals swarming in the seas, and part of their lives as land animals. Again, these are not binary categories when you actually drill down. There's land in the ocean and there's water on the land. This isn't meant to be that way. So actually, when Genesis 1:27 is presented as evidence that transgender identity or gender transition or non-binary people are not something intended by God, if you step back and look at the text itself, you actually see that the opposite point is made in the text. Actually, from the text, you can draw the fact that there is an openness within the text for other possibilities and other expressions of gender. Combine that with the fact that male and female are created in the image of God, and God here is plural. So you have God, and from the image of God comes both male and female. Well, what does that say about the nature of God? And that says that the nature of God is both male and female. Otherwise, we couldn't both be created in the image of God. So it says something about us and also something about God. So what are God's pronouns? And within the Bible, God's pronouns are sometimes male, sometimes female, and sometimes non-binary. So, not things that were really taught within the conservative Adventist tradition, but it's true. It's all there, right there in the Bible. And so we see also, to step back to the questions we asked earlier, the big top level questions we're asking about what kind of a text is Genesis 1 and 2? Is it a model for all time, or is it a beginning? And what is the significance of those things? Well, if it was a model for all time, then there wouldn't be new possibilities, because we'd always just be trying to get back to that. There wouldn't be difference. It closes off the idea that things could expand or cross categories or new things could arise. And yet we see that, in fact, things can expand and cross categories and new things can arise. And so, when you have something that's a beginning, it can be a good beginning, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing that's ever going to exist. It's just a starting point. There's other good things that are going to exist. So on this subject, at least, we find greater support for thinking of Genesis as a beginning. In the beginning is supported here in this passage. And in fact, it's not really in the slides, but I'll say another couple things about this text as it relates to same-sex marriage. So in verse 27, God created them in his image, male and female, he created them. And God said to, and then verse 28, and God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the heavens and every living thing that moves on the earth. So one of the other arguments that's made from this is, hey, when it says God created them male and female, and then immediately God tells them to go be fruitful and multiply, isn't that saying that the male and female are created in order to be in relationship, sexual relationship with one another that results in procreation? Because those things are there. I've got a few things to say about that. First, God created them male and female. This section, verse 27, some of your Bibles will make this very clear, is poetic verse. It's written in a different genre, actually, a different style than verse 28 is written in. So this is poetic verse, and then verse 28 returns back again to a more narrative, more prose, we would say, kind of a writing. So it far from flowing in one to another, they're actually somewhat distinct from one another. For another, the idea that male and female here represented was a way of expressing and representing marriage was something that was not really believed until the 19th century. Literally, it's a very new, in the grand scheme of things, theological interpretation. Around the time of Karl Barth, he was the one who popularized it, though he wasn't the only one who conceived it. And so, somehow we got along without that interpretation for 1800 years of Christian history. It didn't seem so obvious to people. So to say now that it's definitely there and that it definitely means that seems a little bit odd. Further, and this is a big one, the idea of being created in God's image is so central to all of Christianity. It is kind of the underpinning of everything, when Jesus says you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, that flows right out of being created in God's image. God is our parent, so to speak. God is our source, the source of life and goodness, and the character of God is something we seek to reflect in our lives. And it also says something about human worth and dignity. All human beings have worth, have value, have dignity because they're created in the image of God. The distortion of this doctrine has led to the suppression of women, the suppression of Jewish people, the suppression of left-handed people, and justifications for slavery. They really did not believe that the people they were enslaving were the image of God. They thought that they were somehow separated from that, needed to be brought back to that. Literally, I know this is gross, but through the custody of the white people who thought of themselves as superior and truly reflecting the image of God. The same thing with the native peoples. That's why they called them savages. All this theological stuff was behind that. So the distortion of this theology to exclude certain groups has historically been used in extremely repressive ways. And frankly, you see that as well reflected in some writings coming from the Adventist Church, saying things like that LGBT people have a difficult time expressing the image of God because they've distorted it through same-sex marriage and the hyper identity with one gender instead of the balance of gender that God created in Genesis 1:28 or 1:27. And all this is just wild supposition. It's wild supposition. This text shows that all people have dignity, and it's literally used to strip dignity from LGBTQ people and has been used to strip dignity from other people. Just because of a very recent theology that has existed only since the 19th century, late 19th century, I believe. I need to look up that date so I can be sure of it. But anyway, so this idea in itself is I think actually quite offensive. And then also at verse 29, it doesn't just say to be fruitful and multiply, but it says to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So this isn't a command that has no limits, and the earth looks pretty full. I think we're messing it up actually because we have too many people in it. So, 27 is just like an all-time, this is who you are as human beings. You're created in the image of God. And then 28 is more of a practical, here's what I want you to do while you're in the garden. These concepts shouldn't be equated. One is an all-time identity of who you are, and the other is, here's the job I want you to do. And further, if we think of Genesis 1:28 as the first commandment of God, to be fruitful and multiply, we just can't think of it as applying to all people, because that's not a command that Jesus kept. And Jesus is supposed to be our example, right? The greatest expression of who God is. So this be fruitful and multiply thing can't be like a moral imperative. It's something that society in general needs to do. Otherwise, humanity doesn't continue to exist. But it's not something that every individual within society is required to do. And there's a big difference between those two things. Sometimes we do things as a group, we accomplish something that individually each person is not called to do in the exact same way. Well, that doesn't, of course, mean that all people without children don't contribute to helping us as human beings shepherd and bring in the next generation. Okay, that's probably enough of a diversion from that. So yeah, the binary nature that we talk about in Genesis, and say that, gender was created in a binary, just does not hold up to scrutiny. And actually, this goes even beyond Genesis, because there is actually just a way of speaking in general in the Hebrew language. It's called a merism. You don't have to remember that, but it sounds similar to the word mirror. So Hebrew thinking, they often mirror concepts. So oftentimes you'll see in the gospel, the entire Hebrew Bible is referred to as Moses and Elijah, or as the law and the prophets. And in reality, the Hebrew Bible had three sections: the law, the prophets, and the writings. And yet all three, the whole Hebrew Bible, would refer to sometimes as Moses and Elijah, or sometimes as the law and the prophets, because these were the most salient aspects of the whole body of the Hebrew Bible. These were the ones that stood out the most. And so they were used as kind of the mirror images of each other, as a representation of the whole, not to negate the existence of any other prophets or any other teachers of the law, and not to negate the existence of the writings, which, we have like First and Second Chronicles and Daniel and all kinds of other books in the writings. It's not to negate those things. It's actually to include them. That's the intention. The same when it says Jesus is the beginning and the end, it doesn't mean Jesus is not also present in the middle or the Alpha and Omega. It's not to say that God is not in all places, or God is only at the beginning and the end. It's to say that God is all things everywhere. And that's just a very natural Hebrew way of speaking and understanding things. So I've probably given plenty of reason to doubt the traditional Adventist perspective on that. But let's look specifically on how that also might apply to the concept of the Sabbath. Genesis, at the very beginning of Genesis 2, and even though it's placed in chapter 2, it really, if you look at Genesis chapter 2 and the first 3 verses that refer to the Sabbath, it follows the same pattern as chapter 1. I've always thought that whoever split up the verses and chapters kind of made an error here, because there's a lot of linguistic connection in chapter 2. In the first couple verses, it says, "The heavens and earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God finished the work that he had done, rested on the 7th day from all the work that they had done. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it God had rested from all the works done in creation." So I don't know if that beep was important. All right. So you have here a description of the Sabbath that falls within the rest of creation. This is what happened in the morning and the evening on the seventh day, just like the morning and the evening of the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and 6 days. You have the creation of the Sabbath. But here's the interesting thing that we don't think about very much. So, okay, is the Sabbath like the exception to this binary? Now we have the Sabbath, and this is the one thing that's crystallized throughout time, is the Sabbath, and there's no there's nothing different about that. Well, first, it doesn't strictly use the word Sabbath, but it kind of does when it says rest. That's a verbal form of the word Sabbath. So he Sabbathed literally on the seventh day, and so everyone is called to do as God did and also rest on the seventh day, which I think is wonderful. And we're told that this is a commandment that is given for us. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's something for our benefit and for our good. But is it the only day that God's people were ever called to rest? And actually, you find in the Old Testament, I believe it's Leviticus 17 is the most kind of clear passage about that, where it talks about various different Sabbaths. We differentiate them by using a lowercase s, or by putting the word "the" in front of the real Sabbath, the Sabbath, and a lowercase s for the other ones. But in fact, that neither of those was the case in Hebrew. There could have been some more subtle clues about the differences between a Sabbath and the Sabbath. But the point is that this idea of the Sabbath and resting on the Sabbath was not actually reserved only for the Sabbath. There were other days that were also called the Sabbath. So if you want to say God created marriage in Genesis to be between a man and a woman, it can never be different than that, because that's the way the Sabbath is. Actually, that's not the way the Sabbath is. There is the Sabbath that's on the seventh day, but then there are other days that are also the Sabbath that are not on the seventh day, that actually follow the lunar calendar and appear various times throughout the year. Or there's the 7-year Sabbath for the land that is a whole year, that the land is supposed to Sabbath. So so there's other Sabbaths. So it makes it very difficult to make the argument that this is the way marriage was in Genesis, so there can't be any other marriages. Well, otherwise you're undermining the Sabbath. Well, there were other Sabbaths, and God didn't seem to think that those other Sabbaths undermined the Sabbath. In fact, they seem to actually bolster the Sabbath and actually make the Sabbath more important, not less important. So again, we're ignoring the context and making exceptions and not being consistent, which is easy to do, because when you hear something given in the same context again and again all the time, it's very easy to just think of that as just the way that it is. And it's very difficult to get out of our perspective to see something in a different way. So it's understandable that these things are being perpetuated, but we need to point out that there's just not consistency there. So we've talked about this a little bit already. As creation moves forward, it branches out in new possibilities. Frogs don't cancel fish and land animals. So this is also important. When we say this, when we say Genesis is a beginning, we're not just saying, oh, it's kind of just, it's a description of what happened in the past that has no relevance to today. We're not actually saying that. We're just saying that whatever happened in Genesis doesn't cancel out anything else that happens in the rest of time. Just because it happened in Genesis doesn't mean that nothing else can ever happen again. So frogs don't mean fish and land animals somehow no longer exist. This is kind of wild, right? There were no cities in Eden. Everyone worked agriculturally, and yet this didn't mean that cities could never come to exist. But, because cities came to exist doesn't mean that farmers now don't exist. Like, I just feel like sometimes this seems a little bit pedantic, but really, honestly, sometimes the theology taught by the church when it applies to LGBT people is just as pedantic. It's just as kind of, well, that's how it was then, so it can't possibly be another way. But that's just not what we find in the text of Genesis 1 and 2. We don't have a hard time. And the people in the Bible itself also did not have a hard time envisioning that things could be different than they were in Genesis 1 and 2. You know, there was no theological wrestling about whether or not celibacy was going to be acceptable, even though celibacy existed in Genesis 1 and 2. There was no, Paul, when he talked about the importance of celibacy, didn't give us a theological explanation for why celibacy was acceptable, even though it didn't exist in Eden. He didn't do that. Why? Because he didn't see it was necessary, because he didn't think of Genesis 1 and 2 that way. If Paul had thought of Genesis 1 and 2 that way, then that kind of a theological explanation would have been necessary at minimum. But Paul did not think of it that way. And so we also should not think of it that way. Let me give you another example. You probably all know this story. It's from Genesis 2:15. The Lord took man, or Adam, same word in Hebrew. The Lord took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. And the Lord commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the knowledge. Okay, we know that part. And then the Lord said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. So here's something I think about sometimes. It says right here in Genesis 2:18, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a ezer kenego, a helper fit for him, or a savior beside him would be another legitimate translation of that verse, which is not going to show up in this particular translation. So it is not good that man should be alone. That's what it says in Genesis 2:18. Let's do a thought experiment for a moment here. Let's imagine if in verse 2, in chapter 2, verse 18 of Genesis, instead of saying it's not good that man should be alone, let's do a thought experiment and imagine that it said, it is not good that man should be married to another man. If it ever said that so clearly in the Bible, I mean, there's no verse that says anything close to that in the Bible. None of the texts that speak against same-sex eroticism are in any context anywhere close to anything about marriage, not even a little bit. And we can see when we look at them closely what actually is being described. And it's nothing that has anything to do with marriage or a committed partnership, you know, because it actually doesn't say in Genesis 1 and 2 that Adam and Eve were married. That'll really get me in trouble, but the word married doesn't show up. It doesn't say that they're married. It's not to say that they weren't, that they were partners with one another. But it doesn't say that it's, you know, if it said it's not good that Adam should have a partner who is also a male, there's no way, there's no way we would get laughed out of town if we tried to say that same-sex marriage was okay. We would get laughed out of town. We'd be told, look how clearly it says that this isn't good. You know, look how clearly it says, if it said, it's not good that Adam should have a partner that's a man, so I will give him Eve, we would get laughed out of town. And yet, somehow, it's seen as totally okay that this text says it's not good that man shall be alone. And then Adam is given a female sexual partner. And yet somehow celibacy is not only okay, but actually lifted up as the ideal state. And it's what Jesus was, and it's what Paul was. And, you know, you don't find celibacy in the Old Testament unless a person is a eunuch. And yet here we are in the New Testament, and suddenly celibacy is lifted up as a great thing. And nobody says, hey, it says in Genesis 2:18, it's not good for man to be alone. It's just another one of those inconsistencies. There's this tendency to read the Bible very dogmatically, on the subject of same-sex marriage or gender transition, very dogmatically, very literalistically, in ways that we do not read it applied to other subjects, and in ways that the Bible interpreters and writers themselves, the people who wrote scripture, didn't think of it that way either, right? They also did not think of Genesis that way in any respect. So to say that they thought of Genesis that way when it came to same-sex marriage is not consistent. It's actually creating an entirely new interpretive hermeneutic for Genesis 1 and 2 than what's used for other subjects and other topics. It's just something that it's inconsistent. It doesn't work. So let me get back to my slides. It's good that I have these keeping me on track at least a little bit. And then let me finish up, and then we will leave some time for discussion. So, I think this is so obvious to all of us, but it sometimes needs to be pointed out. God created these things in Genesis 1 and 2. These things were created, and then God said that they were good, or even very good in one case. And those things don't cease to be good. Sometimes, as you know, it is presented as if same-sex marriage is going to erase heterosexual marriage, and it's a threat to marriage. We've heard this again and again, but it's just simply not true. Same-sex marriage doesn't cancel out anyone's heterosexual marriage. It doesn't stop. If anything, it only strengthens it. Supporting same-sex marriage doesn't mean you don't also support traditional marriage. Not everybody does, but not all heterosexuals support traditional marriage. Acknowledging the existence of intersex people or of transgender people and of non-binary people doesn't cancel out cisgender people or people with typical anatomy. It just doesn't. I mean, sometimes you just have to say these super obvious things. It just does not, because again and again, we've been told that it does. It does not. So, creation is a model, or creation is a beginning. And I think the evidence for it being a beginning is very, very strong. From the obvious, in the beginning, Genesis means beginning. We're told explicitly that it's a beginning. But also when you look closely at the text, Adam and Eve were told to alter their environment. They were told to fill it with people, and they were told to work to expand actually the limits of the garden. They were told that the garden itself should eventually fill the earth. The whole earth was not a garden. After the fall, they were expelled out of the garden into this wildness of the rest of the earth. It was difficult and painful and involved a lot of hardship. So kind of this narrative that we're given is not that Eden was, just how things were always supposed to be, but that Eden was a kind of a beginning. It was a kind of a starting place. And Adam and Eve were meant to improve upon it. They were meant to fill it with people and expand it. They were meant to care for the earth. They were meant to care for the animals. And things were meant to grow as they progressed. So the end will have traces of the beginning. And this is important too. There's a mirroring between the first 2 chapters of Genesis and the last 2 chapters of Revelation, the beginning and end of the Bible, but they're not exactly the same. The last 2 chapters of Revelation show, there's the river, there's a tree of life, but there's also this huge city that descends from the sky. There's also people who are celibate. Jesus is also living. There's also no night, there's only day. And so it's not supposed to be that we just are recreating Genesis for the rest of our life. That would be to remain in infancy forever. On the other hand, Genesis does tell us what's good, but ultimately our model is not Adam. Our model is Jesus. And we want to embody the character of Jesus. We want to be better at reflecting the love of God in our lives. And part of that comes down to understanding that all humanity is good because we're all created in the image of God. And so God is our model. Jesus is our model, not Adam and not Eve. Those aren't the ones we're trying to be like. And this is a broad theme of the Bible. This is how things were in the Bible. People were trying to be like God. People were trying to love God and love others the way God loved them. And in the New Testament, Jesus comes as a revelation of the character of God. Like this is not like a subtle theme of the Bible, right? This is kind of how things are. And this is just one more way where sometimes we almost flip our theology when we start talking about LGBTQ people. General Christian theology is that Jesus is our model. But then we start talking to LGBTQ people and all of a sudden Adam and Eve are our model. It's like a different religion almost sometimes. But, the beginning does teach us something important. It's not just like a throwaway 2 verses of the Bible at all. The things that are good in Genesis continue to be good. The Sabbath continues to be good. Heterosexual marriage continues to be good. Nature continues to be good. Our responsibility to care for creation, to care for animals, to care for the world continues to be good. That responsibility continues to exist and as poorly as we do at fulfilling it. And then the last slide here, and then we'll take some questions if we have any. I just want to say a couple more points about the Sabbath and marriage. The Sabbath and marriage are not at all the types of concepts where if one falls, the other falls. They're actually quite different in the way that they were created. In marriage, we would be imitating Adam. In the Sabbath, we're actually imitating God, and that is always a good thing to do. The concepts are fulfilled very differently because they're very different. Sabbath is for everyone, all people. We've all accepted, however, a long time ago that marriage is not for everyone. It's not a mandatory institution for all people. Just philosophically speaking, 2 celibate women are not fulfilling marriage. And if those 2 women get married to each other, they're not in a heterosexual marriage either, but neither in either state are they in a heterosexual marriage. So, let's see. All right. So also Jesus kept the Sabbath. Jesus was not married. And we're told to keep the Sabbath in the new earth, but not everyone will be married in the new earth. Perhaps no one will be. We don't really know. It's not the same there's not the same kind of continuity with marriage as there is with the Sabbath, and nor is there the same kind of universality with marriage as there is with the Sabbath. So that is what I have to share with you. I hope it wasn't too much too fast and that it made sense. But if you have questions for me, we have a few minutes left. We've got about 10 minutes left by my accounting. So if you have questions, I'd love to hear them.
Sure. So while folks are gathering their thoughts, one question did come up. So what's next for you?
Here is what's next. Thank you. I love that question. That's a great question. I am just if you are a proofreader and want to help me with my book, I would love to hear from you, because I would love to split up the chapters, because it's just a couple days away from being ready for proofreaders. And then hopefully we can get it proofread fast, get the other things we need to do, print it off, and have some copies in hand, hopefully in September. And then send it to all the Kickstarters, and then make it broadly available for anybody who wasn't part of the Kickstarter. And I'll have pre-orders. I haven't been able to get that done yet, but there will be pre-orders on my website. You can go to my website, aliciajohnston.com, and go to the section for the book. And I should have that up very soon, where you can put in a pre-order if you weren't able to get into the Kickstarter, or if you want to do that. So that's what I'm going to do. And then the next plan is to kind of hit the road and start promoting the book to Adventist spaces that we sometimes lovingly refer to as Adventist ghettos, Adventist communities. So to go promote the book there. And I want to have book readings and also just dialogue and discussion with people about affirming theology. and kind of promote the book there. I am hoping that I will be able to get some financial support in doing that. As we all know, this is not like a huge market where probably the sales of the book is not going to support me in terms of what I need to do and all the time I've spent in the past writing it as well. So we've arranged with Kinship a fiscal sponsorship. So if you want to help support me in those efforts to promote the book, which should start in January, I think after QCF, and just help cover the financial costs and also just my need, for funding that we all have for life. You can make the tax deductible donations through Kinship to help me do that. So, that would be a huge help. I just think, this message needs to be intentionally pushed out, and all of you, of course, can help do that too. I'm hoping I'm going to rewrite it also for a broader Christian audience. And if I have time, I really want to write a shorter version that can be used as a sharing book. And there's all kinds of things I want to do. So we'll see. We'll see how much of them I have time for. Yeah. But if you want me to come to your location, let me know. If you have a space that you can offer and you have people that will be interested, that you can help coordinate that, please contact me and we can work that out. And I would love to be able to do that.
I think you sort of answered that next question, how to, in terms of speaking engagements and whatnot, and they could still go to your website and that would be the best method to reach you.
Just send me a message through Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
And what are those handles for folks?
The Facebook is just Johnston Alicia. So facebook.com/Johnston Alicia. They're also all on my website. So you can get to all those on my website. And there's also just different interviews I've done and stuff that's under the content tab on the website. So you can learn a lot more about the content of the book through some of those interviews. I've done a lot of podcast interviews in the last month. So but you can get to all of them there. It's Pastor Alicia Johnston is my Instagram handle. Decided to go back with the pastor thing. And Alicia and Jay is Twitter. I'm not on Twitter nearly as much as the others. So.
Okay, and I have a pseudo announcement. It says the LA Forum is hoping to have you in 2022 to share with their audience. So wanted to at least
I'm in. I would love to do
that.
that. I'd love to do that.
Well, good. I am not seeing any additional questions. So hold up. I think there's one that popped up. Let's see. Okay. What would you say to a conservative Adventist who doesn't know personally any LGBTQ people? Why should they be affirming or read the book?
So I think that they should probably start with watching Deneen and Stephen's documentary, Seventh Day Adventist, and watching the other films that they produced at a bare minimum. I think they would be wise to recognize that a large percentage of people who are leaving Christianity altogether now are doing so because of the church's teachings on sexuality, and specifically about, the treatment of LGBTQ people. So I think even for their own knowledge, they would be wise to do that. I think they'd also be wise to read Ron Lawson's history of what the Adventist Church has done that's in Spectrum, has done, how they've treated the LGBTQ community to gain some more understanding. But ultimately, it simply comes down to, has God called you to love LGBTQ people? Are we part of humanity? The highest commands are to love the Lord God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And, I'm not saying, oh, I should say that, and now you should change your theology entirely. No, but you should care, because you actually do know LGBTQ people. You just don't know it. And you should care simply because we're part of God's creation. And it's something that's very important to the evangelistic mandates of Christianity to address this better and to care better for LGBTQ people, because the reputation of Christ is suffering because of the church's failures in this area. So if you don't care, then that just makes it even worse. That just that just validates all the criticism of the church. So, or yeah, the society has for the church.
One more question, and I will try to pronounce it correctly. Doesn't the traditional view consider anything new an amalgamation?
I think we have to be careful. Think about the people who have made a difference in your life. Think about the people who have influenced you to think about something in a dramatically different way than you did before, that have really changed your thinking. So if you can think about an example of that, hold it in your mind for a moment, and let me ask you, did that person like you? And did that person respect you? And I'm going to guess that the answer is yes to both of those, that person liked you and that person respected you. By the same token, we could slam on conservative and traditionalist Christians all day long. But if we want to have influence with them, and sometimes we just need to do that for our own sanity. Sometimes we just need to get together and make fun of the people who have hurt us, literally, so that we can reestablish our sense of community and self and understand how wrong what's been done to us is and how awful and terrible it is. And there's a space for that. But when it comes to wanting to make a difference in terms of helping people who are movable on this subject, and that's not everybody, but that is those people who engage in the conversation with goodwill. And if we want to make a difference for those people, then we have to show them that we care about them and that we respect them. Otherwise, we can't do it. So if we kind of come, true or not, from that perspective, we're going to lose our influence. And for the sake of queer kids growing up in the Adventist church, it's very important to me that we don't lose our influence.
Awesome. And one more question. Any advice for Adventists coming out for self-care and sanity? Should we strive to stay in the church?
There's not a specific, this is the right or wrong thing to do. It depends very much on your situation and your church. But I have seen that for most people, it's very difficult for them to remain in the Adventist church long term. I mean, when you think about what church is, it's not just a place where you go to park your fanny and sit and listen to a sermon. That's not what church is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a community. And when you're denied the kind of normal rites of passage that exist in a church, like baptism and marriage and things like that, and if you're denied the opportunity to serve within a church, you are being denied the opportunity to be part of a church. You're only being allowed to sit in the pew, and that's not being part of a church. Not all Adventist churches are like that. There are Adventist churches, that are different in some of those respects. But I think those are some of the cold, hard realities. And this is anecdotal, but I've noticed this in my own life and in other people's lives as well, is that you come out, and I think there's an initially almost an idealism, like nothing is going to change in my life, in my theology, and my Adventism, except now I'm affirming. But the church makes that very difficult, doesn't it? It reveals itself in a way that is painful and very hard to deal with. And you start to see the dark side of Adventism and of Christianity in a way that you never have before. And that experience makes it very difficult to maintain being the way that you have been before. And so for most people, sooner or later, sometimes it's a period of days or sometimes it's a period of a few years, most people enter into a period of just deconstruction where the old the old systems and the old ways of thinking just aren't working anymore. They were supported by a community that now rejects me. And if they've been so wrong about this, and if their character is so flawed in this area, and this community is so unhealthy in this area, then what else is wrong? And so you enter this period of just deconstruction where everything seems just out of control and you don't know what's happening. And, and I think before, this part I've seen for a long time, and I just think, well, and then people kind of land wherever they land. But what I've now begun to realize in myself and in some other people I know as well, is that sometimes there's then a later stage in which you eventually begin to recover some compassion for the people who have hurt you. You begin to heal yourself, and the community is less threatening. I think early on in my process, I hated the Adventist church because I loved the Adventist church. And it was, I so badly wanted to be part of that community again. And I knew I couldn't be, that I just pushed and hated it. And I kind of had a consciousness that this was going on with me emotionally, which was really helpful. So I just kind of stayed the course and let what was happening happen. I didn't put too much stock into it because I could tell I was in movement. And so I think that that's helpful too, to recognize you're kind of in movement and you're healing. But sometimes once you've healed, and this isn't by any means mandatory, but sometimes compassion begins to arise again for the people who have hurt you. And you learn to be able to respect them and care about them, and kind of a desire to be back in that community might actually be gone because you've more fully embraced who you are now and where you are now, and you're able to engage in a healthier way again with the church. And I think that's kind of what I see now as being a possible next step. And then for some people, it's just like, I'm so done with that. And sometimes that means they're done with Christianity, or they embrace a different faith tradition, or Gnosticism, atheism, or whatever. I don't really like the terms agnostic and atheist, but that's for a whole nother discussion. But whatever you do with some people just are done, and that's fine too. And I'm not critical of that at all. But we all kind of go our different ways. So for myself, I'm finding more and more ability to re-engage, and that's exciting for me. Although, it's not 100%, and I need to take real good care of myself and be real careful about how I do it. So.
Okay, well, on behalf of Kinship, Pastor Johnston, I definitely want to thank you for taking time out once again to share some thoughts, some insights, and upcoming things that you are working on. It's been a pleasure having you here as part of SDA Kinship's camp meeting, and we look forward to finding out what else is happening. So thank you very much for your time.
Somebody said something about, I kind of use this, I use a teleprompter, so the words are backwards, but someone said something about you might have an agnostic or atheist in your audience. Let me just clarify. I personally do not find those terms particularly helpful, but other people do, and that's fine. And I have no qualms. I just want to just clarify. What I meant to express is that I totally understand and have no qualms whatsoever with people who identify as atheist or agnostic or want to have nothing to do with religion anymore. Like, I just totally get that. I'm not meaning to be pejorative in any way. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, and then I have two other quick points that I want to say, that there are welcoming Adventist churches for those who are interested in finding out. Just simply go to welcomingadventistchurches.org. And there was one more message I wanted to share, is that you don't have to be a member in good standing in the church to still be an Adventist and to believe the things that you want to hold on to. The Kinship community is here for you to be a safe space for you and your beliefs and be respected. So I definitely wanted to share those couple of insights that did come up in the chat, as well as to share that Tomorrow we have our Kinship Town Hall. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with the link. So thank you again, Pastor Johnston, for your time. And we look forward to lots of things in the future. But for everyone else, tomorrow we have our Kinship business meeting. It's at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can always go to the website for the direct link to go ahead and RSVP. The information is here. So I'll keep this on for the next few moments. And once again, thank you everyone for joining us for Kinship's Camp Meeting. And we look forward to 2022, where our goal is to be in person in sunny Orlando, Florida.